Ada, Julie, nice to see you. Jerry from the Salvation Army, good to see you. Nice to see familiar faces. Hard to believe this is our last webinar of the year. So excited to see all of you on. Another from Rhode Island. We have Maine Audubon. Nice to see you. Kate from Alberta. Wonderful place. And please go ahead and put your name and where you're zooming in from, and we'll get started in just a second. Hey, Britt, nice to see you. Mandy, Catherine, welcome, welcome. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started with today's webinar. As everybody is still joining, you're in for a special treat today. My name is Judy Browse. I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education. So happy you could join us today for the webinar. We know you have a lot of competing demands, and as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who are on, this is our last webinar of the year. Hard to believe. And you know, Ann and I were counting these up, and we've done 24 webinars this year, which is pretty amazing for us. And we do know that it's been a very difficult year. So thanks to all of you for sticking with us and joining our webinars. We've learned a ton together. So it's been wonderful. And we really hope that all of you have a wonderful holiday. I know it's going to be a different holiday, but there is hope around the corner with the vaccines and many other things that are taking place. So I hope you have a relaxing, wonderful holiday. And we're so happy that you're part of the NAAEE family. We have learned so much from all of you. Thanks for joining. And we are so excited to have Andy Goodman back with us today. Many of you might have joined in April during the early days of the pandemic when Andy did a webinar on webinars. And now he has a brand new report called Unmuted, What Works, What Doesn't, and How We Can All Do a Better Job of Working Together Online. And we'll get a chance to hear what he discovered in that report. And he pulled together all the best practices, and we're going to all learn a ton. And I just want you all to know how intimidating it is to be doing a webinar with the guru of webinars. But we're doing our best, Andy, just so you know, as we go forward on this, and we look forward to learning so much from you. And I'll introduce Andy more in just a minute, but just a couple of housekeeping. For those of you who are new to NAAEE, these webinars are bringing new ideas and ways of looking at our field and how we work together during COVID and beyond. And we are always looking for new ideas and suggestions for webinars. So if you have any ideas, please send them to me or Ann or Rachel, and we'll put those on the agenda as we think ahead. We are so thrilled to have our partnership with the Forest Service. It's been a wonderful partner for so many years. And this is part of our eeINSPIRE webinar series in conjunction with the Forest Service. And we're really happy that Rachel could be here with us. And Rachel is new to the Forest Service, but not new to the field. So Rachel, do you want to say hello to everybody?
I'll just say hello. This is my second eeINSPIRE webinar series now. I'm so excited to work with the Forest Service on these. And I'm not going to say anything else because we all want to hear from Mr. Goodman. So just excited to learn great things on this webinar.
Thanks, Rachel, for being here and for all that you do. We're thrilled to work with you. And I also want to thank all our affiliate co-hosts who are partners in crime to strengthen environmental ed around North America, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. What amazing partners. And if you need more on your affiliates, you can go to our website, but I hope you all join your local, state, and regional and provincial affiliates. And I do know you've been on 8 gazillion Zoom webinars and meetings. So you know the drill. For those of you who don't use Zoom, just know you're all muted and you can communicate with all of us using the chat function. And you can either send a note to everybody you see that has a video, the panelists, or to everyone. And just remember that throughout the webinar, as Andy's talking, you can add questions, resources, comments, all of that. You'll get a copy of the recording and the PowerPoints. And there also, it will be an after school time for a few minutes. If we don't get to all your questions, thank you, Andy, for that. We love that. And we've been using that forever. Oh, you just got in the chat. Andy is amazing. I love it. And we are doing live captioning to help with the audio for anybody who needs help. And thank you, Raven, for being our live captioner. Big thank you to Anne, who is my partner in crime on these webinars. She is amazing. If you have any issues or questions, you can email Anne. And thanks to Celia, who works with Andy. And Celia is amazing and wonderful. And we're so happy you could be on. She'll be helping to screen the questions in the chat. And now I am so excited to introduce Andy Goodman. I first heard Andy giving a presentation on how to give a presentation years ago, and I was hooked from the beginning. He is such a terrific supporter of NAAEE and all of us working in the nonprofit sector. He also gave a great keynote at our conference in San Diego. So Andy, we might have to drag you back for another keynote in the near future. He's a fantastic communicator. He cares about helping all of us succeed. And he believes that all of us can make sure that good presentations happen, we're telling good stories, and we're doing the best online stuff we can do. And he's been a great friend of NAAEE. He's the director of the Goodman Center. He's a well-known author. He's a speaker. He's a consultant. He's worked in public interest communications. He's a pro on storytelling, on how to give great presentations, and on how to do strategic communications. And he also wrote the book that some of you have on why bad presentations happen to good people. And if you don't have that, it's a wonderful resource. We did a webinar on that as well, and it's on our YouTube channel. And today is going to help us talk about, as I mentioned, all our online learning experiences and meetings and how to make them better. He's spoken everywhere from the Harvard Kennedy School to the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. And as one of his past clients said, Andy Goodman takes your best ideas and makes them better. So Andy, thank you for all you do for all of us. I'm going to turn it over to you so we can hear your wisdom. And we really look forward to hearing what the report said. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you, everybody. Let me share my screen so we can look at the slides for today's presentation. Give me a second to do that. Okay, let's go full screen on that. And welcome to Unmuted, what works, what doesn't, and how we can all do better when working together online. Let's jump right into the agenda. We're going to do 4 things in a very quick hour today. First, I want to give you a little context. We did this report, and we've been studying webinars and video conferences for years. So I want to tell you a little bit about our background, specifically in understanding this form that we're all experiencing today. I want to define terms. We all moved our activities online, and some of us call them video conferences, webinars, meetings, all different types of terms. We're going to use 3 terms today, so I want to make sure that we've got our jargon together. And then we're going to go into the report. In this report, we had 9 takeaways. And so today we're going to go through each takeaway, what we learned, and the recommendations we have for you based on those learnings. And in the end, we have some resources for you besides this report, which you can download if you haven't already. Some other things you might want to have on hand to have more productive, more engaging webinars, video conferences. So first, let's start with context. And along the way, if you have a question at any point, as Judy said, put it in the chat box. My Associate Director, Celia Hoffman, will be monitoring the chat box, and we will stop periodically for your questions. So put them there. We'll make sure we get to them. And if we don't, we have after class time, so we'll get to them one way or another. But let's talk about how we got here. So we've been down this road before. When the Great Recession hit in 2008, 12 years ago, that led to the first big uptick in video conferencing. All kinds of organizations, particularly nonprofits, were looking for ways to save money. And one way was to stop, flying people in for meetings and conferences and to do it via video conference. So that's when we saw the first big usage of it by the nonprofit sector. And because of that, we did a study called Dialing In, Logging On, Nodding Off to see what was working and what wasn't. And in that study, we started to identify the first problems and trends that we've been following ever since. We put out that study in 2009. And the other thing we did that year was we started to teach this class called the Webinar on Webinars, which we did, by the way, for NAAEE back in April of this year. We did it to teach best practices, but also to learn from people who took the class, because every step of the way, every year as it passed, new technologies, new platforms, new best practices. So we've really been studying this closely for about 11 years. And we've logged literally hundreds of hours teaching and learning from our students to say, how do we make the best of this type of meeting or gathering? And then in March of this year, everything changed. All of a sudden, the pandemic hit, and we all had to work inside, work from home, and suddenly everything we did started to look like this. So we thought, what better time to do a new round of research? So in July and August of this year, we partnered with all of these organizations and NAAEE as well, asking them to put out a survey to their members, their affiliates, their readers in some cases, asking them to talk about webinars, web meetings, web conferences, what works and what doesn't. And 4,405 people, including possibly some of you, because I know a lot of people took the webinar through NAAEE, 4,405 people took the survey, giving us a very rich data set. Basically, people like you telling us, here's what works and here's what doesn't. So today we're going to go through the report. And when we decided to look at what works and what doesn't, the first thing people told us is that it depends on the kind of convening you're having. What works for a small web meeting of 5 or 10 people may not work for a webinar with 50 or 100 people, or a webcast with 1,000 people. So one of the first things we learned was you had to be specific with what you were talking about. So the 3 terms we're going to use today are this. Number 1 is when we talk about a webinar, we're talking about basically what this is today. It's primarily information sharing. It's for teaching, training, or presenting. It's usually a one-way delivery of information featuring a speaker or a panel of speakers. There is opportunity for interaction, but it is more confined because it tends to be a larger group. Now, that's very different from a web meeting, which could be as few as, a handful, 3, 5, 10 people getting together, via Zoom or some other platform, where it's mostly about discussion and decision making. You'll still see lots of faces on a screen and maybe not so much slides. And there's lots of interaction. And then there's the webcast. This is the larger kind of presentation or meeting, an organization-wide meeting or a conference. This usually is also a one-way delivery of information featuring an individual speaker or panel or performer. And interaction is very highly confined because there's so many people. Now, the reason we have this as a Venn diagram is because there's overlap among these 3 things. I'm sure you've been in webinars that were very interactive or web meetings where there was a presentation. So they're not entirely discrete, but we think these 3 terms are useful. And as we go through the data, you're going to see that we got results for each one. Now, some of you may be saying, well, what about the multi-day training or the multi-day conference that has now moved online? Where does that fall with these definitions? Well, we think it's really all 3. Those multi-day conferences we go to, we attend virtually online now, that keynote speech that used to be for everybody in the big hall, well, that's your webcast. Then we break out for concurrent sessions in different meeting rooms. Those are your webinars. And those team meetings we would have in other places, those are your web meetings. So we think these 3 basic definitions pretty much take in everything that we do online. So let's dive into the 9 takeaways. For each one, we'll talk about what we learned and some very specific recommendations, things that you can do to improve, make your webinars more productive and more engaging. And by the way, again, if you haven't already downloaded this report, you can go to our website, thegoodmancenter.com, and just download it there for free. Or I think NAAEE can make it available to you directly through them. But let's go through the takeaways. Here's takeaway number 1 on engagement and participation. Take a moment to read that for yourselves. This really is number 1 in every sense of the word. This is where it all begins, because the fight for engagement and participation is every minute of every day when you're meeting like this online. People are working from home mostly. The opportunity to be distracted is huge. The tendency to multitask is huge. So you're constantly fighting for their attention. We asked this question in the survey. We said, what makes an online convening a positive experience. And look, engaging presentation, engaging facilitation, the number one answer. And the number three answer, using platform tools to promote interaction, well, that's basically the how of engaging, right? And when we turned the question around and we said, well, what makes it a negative experience? Well, technical problems came in at number one. I'm sure you can identify with that, but lack of engagement was number two. So clearly people say, I want to be engaged. I want to participate. I'm not just there to be talked at hour after hour. That said, there's an awful lot of multitasking going on. We asked this question, and look, whether you were talking about web meetings, webinars, or webcasts, people told us that they were frequently or always multitasking at least half the time, no matter what kind of gathering you were having. So while on the one hand, people want to be engaged, on the other hand, a lot of the time, they're just not. They're just doing other stuff. So how do we fight that fight to keep them engaged? Well, one thing is to give them something to do right from the start. If you have a starting time of, let's say, 1 p.m. Pacific or 4 p.m. Eastern, and people join on time, but you delay the start because of the laggards, and invariably, there are people who are late to the meeting, the message to the on-timers is, all right, fill the time on your own, don't worry, we're going to start in a couple of minutes. And they'll start multitasking right away. They'll check their email. They'll do other things. So you don't want to start with that type of spirit. So what we recommend is have some activities or slides or things up front. So for the people who show up on time, there's something for them to do right away. As you see the example here, we have slides before one of our webinars, meetings for people who hate meetings, that we call points to ponder. So that while people are waiting for the laggards to show up, there's some stuff that they can read, maybe some facts, maybe some quotes, or maybe we'll do a little icebreaker or something like that. This is bonus information. This is not the hard content of the webinar, but something to tell the on-timers, we're going to use every minute you give us productively. Throughout a webinar or any type of web meeting, look for ways to ask questions. Don't just present information if you can. Here's an example from a webinar we did about design principles for communications materials, in this case, websites. We learned that, for example, when people look at a web page for the first time, according to actual studies, they tend to scan it in an F-shaped pattern. That's the way their eyes track it. Now, that's good information. If you're a designer of web pages and you want to put stuff where people are looking, that's useful information. But here it's just presented to you to take it in, learn from it, now go do better next time. But imagine if instead, when we got to this part of the webinar, instead we had a pop quiz. And we said, according to eye tracking studies, your eyes are most likely to follow which pattern? And we call on somebody and have them do a little critical thinking on the spot, pick an answer and justify it. And at the same time, everyone else in the audience is doing the same thing, right? So look for ways to ask questions, to get people to have to do some thinking, not just be handed information to absorb. Certainly, you can use things like polls, Zoom and other platforms. Very easy to set up polls in advance or even on the spot. That's what a poll looks like, for example, in Zoom, if you haven't seen them already. Sometimes people are reluctant to participate in larger groups. They can be very intimidating. So that's where breakout rooms come in handy. Get people into a smaller group, 3, 5, 10, and they're more likely to speak up. But here's something interesting that we didn't expect to learn from the research. Take a moment to read that for yourselves. Isn't that interesting? Creative use of the chat box. People was the #1 response people had when it said, how do I make for a more engaging, more participatory web convening? Now, what do we mean by creative use of the chat box? Well, a lot of this you may know, but maybe there's a new idea for you. For example, you can share links. In fact, some people may be doing that right now. If there's a resource you want to point people to, a website, a video you want them to download, etc., those links can go right in the chat box. People can click right in them, get right there. You can conduct snap surveys rather than actually set up a poll. If you're just looking for a one-word answer, yes, no, a number, what have you, you can use a chat box to do something like that. You can have a chat storm. Now, if you've never heard this term before, this was new to us until a few weeks ago when someone suggested it in one of these webinars. the way a chat storm works is you ask the group a question, like, for example, if I said, which organization puts on the best webinars? All right, I want everyone to put their answer. Don't do this, I'm just demonstrating. I want everyone to put their answer in the chat box, but don't hit enter yet. And then I'm going to count us down and we're all going to enter at the same time. So everybody do it? Okay, 3, 2, 1, hit it, and boom, there you go. Looks like it's a NAAEE. That's a chat storm. You can use it to post footnotes or citations rather than clutter up your PowerPoint slides with all this fine print. If you need to do simultaneous, citations, put them in the chat box. Let your slides be that much cleaner. And a lot of people lament the fact that it's hard to read the room when you can't see everybody in it. Maybe their video is off, or maybe you just can't see all the videos at the same time. And you're wondering, are they still with me? Do they get it, etc.? You can ask those questions in the chat box, whether you type them in or have your partner do it. You can ask questions like, was that clear? Did everyone get that? Is everybody still with me? It's a little awkward. I mean, it is the explicit asking of the question that you normally can answer by just looking at people in a room. But hey, we're in a different universe here. Different rules apply. Another way to engage people is to let them sort of go offline for a while and come back. When we do our storytelling workshop, like we did a few months ago with Syracuse University, there was a part where we needed them to fill out a template to outline a story that they were working on. And we had emailed them this template earlier. But when we got to that part of the workshop, we said, okay, take out that template. It's going to take you 20 minutes to complete it. So do this. Leave your computer on, leave your connection going, but get up, get outside if it's a nice day, get some fresh air, go sit in a comfortable chair. Take 20 minutes to fill it out, and then come back and then we'll work on it together. So offline activities within the context of a larger online meeting. And we also advocate stopping and taking questions frequently, not just at the end of the session, but usually after every major section if you can, at least every 15 or 20 minutes, a chance for people to check in, whether it's through the chat box and having someone like Celia relay your questions or having people actually unmute and speak up. And it's good, as the University of Florida does, when you ask for questions, to remind people of the technology and how to do it. One interesting thing about asking questions, something we learned from the survey. On the survey that we did, and the short version we gave you, you see how we asked the question, do you prefer asking questions out loud or via chat? Well, interestingly, it depends on the kind of meeting people are having. We asked this in our survey, and people told us that when they're in a meeting, which tends to be a smaller group of people, more people say, no, I prefer to speak up. I don't want to put in the chat box. I can see you, you can see me. There's only 5 of us here. Let's not go through that procedure. So in smaller meetings, people prefer to ask questions out loud. But in larger gatherings like today, the majority actually prefer to chat, to put it in the chat box as opposed to asking out loud. So when it comes to taking questions in your gatherings, sometimes the kind of gathering will be a guide as to how you should do it. So we are about 20 minutes into this webinar today. So I want to stop there and see if there are any questions or comments. If there's anything in the chat box, I'm going to ask Celia to relate to you, or now's the time to put it in. Celia, anything in the chat box that we've missed so far?
Well, Larissa added that instead of a chat storm, she's heard it called a chat waterfall.
Waterfall? Okay.
Yes. And Wanda, if you just send me a clarifying chat about the storytelling template, that would be helpful. And then we actually did get some questions from registrants initially. And one question that we got was, how do we keep people engaged during a week-long virtual training?
Well, really, everything that we're talking about today, a week-long training is, X number of hours every day, and every hour is a fight for engagement. So I think by the end of this session, we're going to give you even more recommendations. But really, everything we talk about in terms of the number of breaks and interactivity and offline versus online, hopefully all of that can be incorporated into a week-long experience.
A couple more questions. Do we have time for one or two more?
Hold those for the next break if you don't
Okay.
mind. Let's move on to takeaway number 2, which is about inclusivity. Take a moment to read this for yourselves. these were some of the most striking numbers, some of the most interesting data in the survey. As much as people are aware of the need for webinars and web meetings and conferences to be inclusive and accessible, awareness is not action. We're not getting there. We asked this question in the survey: how often have you seen convening leaders or facilitators say or do things to create an inclusive space, right, that acknowledges and adjusts to the diversity of all participants? Now, you would think that these days that would be a frequently or always, right? That people are hip to this and are working on it on a regular basis. But look at our responses. The largest group, 43%, said sometimes, and you can see that you had, what, 33% rarely and 6% never. So we're leaning in the wrong direction. You know, to my mind, this should be a no-brainer. So some things you can do. First of all, give people a chance to check in formally or informally. You can ask people to introduce themselves, either speaking up or in the chat box. As you saw Judy do at the very beginning, just acknowledging people, where you're from, talking about the snow we just had, etc. This is all a nice way just to check in and, you know, let people know that you're there and to acknowledge them. It's the moral equivalent of standing at the door of the conference room and greeting people as they walk in. Also, you want to be clear on the rules of engagement. Whether you have them planned out in advance or you do community agreements that you build together, people want to know exactly, how do I participate? Do you want me to speak up? Should I be in the chat box? You know, will there be a time for discussion, etc.? Let them know beforehand exactly how to participate to the fullest. That's a good way of being inclusive. We asked this question in the survey and in our mini survey: whether you are leading or participating, what have you seen or done to create a more inclusive space? We're really interested in what people are doing. So if you've seen or done things like that beyond what we've just mentioned now, would you please put those in the chat box? I'm going to ask Celia to keep an eye on that. We may talk more about that later, but this is something where we're learning as we go. So if you've seen interesting, useful, successful ways of creating a more inclusive experience, please put that in the chat box now. This is ongoing research for us. But let's talk about a subset of inclusivity, which is accessibility, making sure that people can literally see, hear, read, understand what's on the screen, no matter what kind of abilities they bring to your gathering. And again, this strikes us as something that should be in the frequently to always range. If people can't see, hear, or comprehend because of whatever reasons, you know, you're not off first base. So you would think that everyone would be attending to this, but look at this. No matter what type of gathering we're talking about, when it came to doing this on a frequently to always range, 12% at best were doing it frequently to always, no matter what kind of convening we're talking about. So what can you do? Well, first of all, the various platforms out there, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, GoToWebinar, etc., they all have lots of tools for accessibility. Today, for example, I know that we're doing closed captioning as one such tool. So learn what your platform can do. You may be surprised at all the different tools that are available. Now, I will say these do vary by level of service, so maybe not everything is available, but there's often a lot there that we're not even bothering to use. The Communications Network had a conference back in September. This is what it looked like as it ran along. This was really a model of accessibility, because look at what they did. They had American Sign Language interpreters on a separate Zoom channel, you know, brought into the main screen there. So you had ASL translation, and they had computer-assisted real-time transcription, or CART, and you as the audience could actually choose your font size or style, whatever made it most readable for you. So accessibility is doable. And you may not know this. We talked about this just 2 hours ago with another class. PowerPoint also has wonderful tools for accessibility. In the most recent versions of PowerPoint, also depends on the OS you're working with on your computer. But did you know that PowerPoint, if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, it can do live subtitles as you speak, basically closed captioning for you, or even translation? Let me show you an example. In setting up this presentation today, I clicked on the slideshow setting there. You see that first arrow. And then where it said subtitle settings, I set this up so that I would be speaking English, but that I could click a button and instantly have it translate into Spanish. So in the lower left-hand portion of the screen now, there's an icon here. I think you can see it. I'm going to click on it. And now you should see a black bar along the bottom of your screen and instant translation into Spanish. Now, I am not a Spanish speaker, so I'm not sure how accurate the translation is, but I've been told by others that it's pretty good. And you can actually choose one of up to 70 different languages to translate into. And with another version of PowerPoint, I think it's called Presentation Live, there's actually a version where you can be speaking one language, say English, and your audience members can choose the language that works best for them. So simultaneous translation into many languages. And with a click of a button, it's turned off. Third takeaway is about leadership and facilitation. Please take a moment to read this for yourselves. We were shocked at how little training people had had to do this and do it well. How would you describe the training you've had to facilitate or lead online convenings? From 35 to 48%, from about a third to about a half, no training whatsoever. Now, look, back in March, when we were all sort of thrust in this position of doing online gatherings, it would be reasonable to say, yeah, we've got a lot of people sort of winging it, learning it as they go. But we did this survey in July and August, and by then we thought, well, people could have invested in at least a little bit of training. And even here we are today now in December, and we still hear about a lot of instances where people have, again, had no training in how to do this. You know, what you're doing today may be your first experience of sitting down and thinking, how do I do this well? We also asked this question: how often do the convening leader or facilitator provide sufficient instruction up front on how to use the video conferencing platform's tools? In other words, making sure that people knew how to mute and unmute, ask questions, etc. Again, Judy did it right up front. She said, you know, some of you may know this or not, but just a quick reminder of how to do it. This should be in the frequently to always category. But look, from 57 to 71%, you know, no instructions or rarely giving instructions or just sometimes. This should be, again, another no-brainer. Now, the only credible exception here is this. If you're meeting with the same group of people week in and week out on the same platform like Zoom, and you know that everyone knows how to use it, then fine, skip by this. But if you're in any kind of meeting where you're cycling in new people and you do not know for sure their level of proficiency, then take a minute or two to make sure they know how to mute, unmute, camera on, off, ask questions, etc., so that they are comfortable and know how to participate. If you don't do it, you're really opening up a can of worms that you don't need to worry about. Another question we asked in the survey was about what challenges do you face as a leader or facilitator? What makes it difficult for you? And we identified 7 challenges. You see them on the left there. We asked people to rank them, as to on a 1 to 5 basis as to how challenging. 1 meaning not very challenging, and 5 meaning very challenging. And look what we learned. That paying attention to several simultaneous streams of information, what's on the screen, participant lists, chat, other apps that may be open, other programs, almost number 1 across the board. People are saying it's hard to do all these different things at once. So based on this data, a couple recommendations. Number 1, if you have not had any training, there's plenty of tutorials on the web, either within the platform you're using it itself or on YouTube, to make sure you know how to use it to the fullest. So there's lots of good information out there. If you have to lead a webinar, meeting, conference, and if you can, don't go it alone. There's lots of things to do. So to avoid this thing of dealing with simultaneous streams of information, we recommend having a team do it. Like today, for example, we have several people behind this webinar, but Celia and I are the main team right now because she's keeping an eye on the chat box. We have other people watching for technical problems. It allows me to focus on the presentation and answering your questions. Casey Family Programs, another client of ours, you can see they have 5-person teams behind every webinar. And lastly, Again, if you don't know the level of proficiency of the people participating, take a moment up front to cover the basics so that everyone can participate to the fullest. Takeaway number 4 is about structure. Please take a moment to read this for yourselves. This was another interesting finding because what we discovered was that people now working at home are in this environment where it's just filled with distractions, where their professional life is bleeding into their personal life. And if they're going to turn over an hour or more of their lives to you for an online gathering of any kind, they crave structure. They want to make sure that this time is going to be well used and that the convening leader or facilitator has really thought about how every minute's going to go. In fact, the word that came up the most when we talked about this was agenda. Is there a clear agenda as to what we're going to do? We don't just want to get online and say, let's figure it out as we go. How often do the convening leader or facilitator provide an agenda, either in advance or at the beginning? Well, again, I think this should be a frequently or always, but we're provided sometimes or less often, 44 to 54% of the time. That's a really significant percentage for people not to be getting agendas, just outlining what's going to happen. We're not talking about anything too complex, just letting people know this is what we're going to cover today in order. That's very helpful. If it's a training or a presentation, maybe the learning objectives are listed. To let people know up front, this is what you're going to get. This is how we're going to do it. That someone has taken some time to think about the structure. And personally, I have a preference for agendas that track progress, agendas that reappear throughout the webinar or the meeting to let people know where you've been, where you are, where you're going. Here's an agenda from Get to College. If you were to join this webinar midstream and this slide was to come up on the screen, you would know instantly that the first 3 sections have been covered. We're in 4 and 5, 4 more to go. You might also intuit from those 3 bars on the left that this is part of a larger 3-part presentation and we're in section 2, we're in the middle somewhere. So this agenda will constantly reoccur and be updated as the webinar moves along to reinforce structure as you go. Another way of doing that, here's a slide from the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative. This is a presentation that had 5 parts to cover, as you see here, 5 core ideas, but they're color-coded. Let me show you the entire presentation in slide sorter mode. So you can see when you get into section 1, the background of the slides is green, section 2 blue, et cetera, et cetera. They're using design to reinforce structure, to let you know where you are every step of the way. And as I said, the people working at home, they're very grateful that someone's taken the time to make sure this is clear. Takeaway number 5 about length and frequency. How often, how many, how few? Take a moment to read this. We asked these questions on the survey, and we asked you to fill this out as well. How many hours do you spend in video conferences? How long, et cetera? We were really curious about this. What could people do? What could they put up with? Over the course of a typical week, how many hours are you spending in work-related web-based convenings, meetings, conferences, big, small, whatever? Most people fell in the 6 to 20-hour range. I'm guessing that may be where you fall as well. Now, what we were really curious was, can people do this all day long? So we asked this question. We asked people, do you agree or disagree? If a web-based convening has a skilled facilitator, offers activities that engage participants, regular breaks, in other words, best case scenario, it's a very well-run meeting. I can remain focused and productive for any length of time up to and including 8 hours. That's either one long 8-hour thing or several meetings in a row that add up to 8 hours. But if it's all done well with breaks and engagement and all that stuff, can you do it for a full 8 hours? Do you agree? Well, we've got an almost even split here. 54% said, yeah, if those circumstances are in place, I can do it all day long. but a significant percentage, almost half, 46% said no. I don't care how good it is. I'm not sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours staring at a screen. I'd rather kill myself, right? Well, that is a significant enough percentage that we wanted to go deeper into this. So we took that 46% and we said, if you disagreed or strongly disagreed, what is the total number of hours you can participate in a single day and still feel focused and productive? And look at what they told us. 87% of this half said 2 to 4 hours is pretty much it for me. We also asked people, what's the ideal length for a meeting, webinar, or webcast? And really, regardless of the format, the sweet spot seemed to be around 60 minutes. And when we asked, well, how long can you go without a break? Maybe the meeting requires 2 hours or 3 hours to cover all the content. So where should the breaks come? And here some people said, I can't go more than 30 minutes without a break. Some people said I can go as much as 90. So 30 to 90 seem to be the range in which breaks should occur to accommodate what people need. So based on this data, oh, by the way, let me go back a second. I want to show you one neat little thing we discovered. If you take a break in the course of a meeting, let's say you're going to take a 15-minute break. What a lot of people do is they would get to this point. Now they'd say, all right, let's take a 15-minute break. Come back and, it's 20 of 2, come back and at 5 of 2 or 5 of 5, whatever, wherever you are. That's relying on people to keep an eye on the clock and, having the same time and all that stuff. And just having something like this up on the screen. So what we recommend is that you have a break slide that looks like this. It lets anyone who enters at any point know exactly what's going on. And we have a timer clock in the upper left-hand corner. So when we start the break, we start the clock, and we tell people when that clock gets down to 0, we're going to start again. So keep an eye on the screen. When you see it get 0, off we go. Now, a number of people said they like this. They go, well, where do you get that timer clock? How do you do that? Not too hard. Go to YouTube and just search countdown timer. There are little videos, just like you see there, 5-minute, 10-minute, 15, 20. You can download whatever one you like. Put that in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Suddenly you've got a timer clock. So I hope that little tip is helpful. But here are the recommendations on length and frequency based on what we learned from the data. Number 1, yeah, you have some people who can go all day long, but since such a significant percentage don't want to go longer than 4 hours, we really say, if you can, no more than 4 hours a day maximum for online convenings per person. If possible, limit the convenings to an hour. That's what people tell us is the sweet spot. But if you have to go longer, build in breaks, and we recommend breaks ideally every 30 to 45 minutes. So we have a couple more sections to go, but before we get there, let's stop again for questions that have been piling up in the chat box. Celia, anything, what's been piling up since we last stopped?
Well, I want to say there's a ton of great suggestions about interaction and about accessibility. So if you want to download the chat, I know it's being recorded, but if you also want to download the chat, you can go to the 3 buttons on the side of the chat and press save chat, and that will actually allow you to save a lot of the valuable information that's in there. Questions that have popped up are how do you translate some of what we've learned here into teaching elementary school and junior high and high school students?
That's a very good question, and that's a little bit above my pay grade, because I would say with high school students, I think that hopefully they're similar enough to the adults that we teach every day here that you can keep them focused. But even there, when you're dealing with high school, middle school, or elementary school, it's a whole different level of attention. And I do not claim expertise in engaging the mind of people 18 and below. If anyone can answer that question, I would urge you to put that in the chat box. But there's a very specific expertise that I cannot claim. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question.
Got it. And I'm sorry, I misspoke about the chat. It looks like that capability is not available, but the chat is being recorded. So know that when you watch the recording, you can also view the chat. So sorry about that.
Let's move on. We have a few more to cover, and we will stick around for after class time. Takeaway number 6 is about preferred platforms. Take a moment to read this. So no surprise here. You probably said you don't need a national survey to tell me that. Zoom came in as number 1, but there was one thing that did surprise us. We asked people, please list the 5 platforms you use the most, because a lot of people use multiple platforms. We use Microsoft Teams at the office, but we use Zoom for for our larger meetings, etc. But we asked them not only which ones do you use the most, but how would you rate them on a 1 to 5 scale in terms of satisfaction? And look what we found. Not only was Zoom used most often, but on a 1 to 5 scale, of the top 5 that people said they used, it got the highest ratings. So Zoom most used and most satisfaction among all the platforms. So when people ask us for recommendations, we're thinking of doing more webinars, web meetings. What platform do you recommend? It really comes down to this. We say Zoom, but Zoom, because there's such familiarity with it and such satisfaction, we think it's a relative no-brainer that it can serve you well. The but is this. Platforms are evolving. The technology is evolving so quickly that any day, week, or month now, there may be some innovation that turns one platform into the absolute must for you. It becomes the Facebook that makes MySpace obsolete, right? And the example we have on the screen here is Microsoft Teams, for example, has pioneered something called Together Mode. Now, if you've never seen this, actually, you may have seen this because if you're a sports fan like I am and you watch the NBA playoffs, back in the summer, you see in the picture here, you see how it looks like fans are in the stands and rows of seats? That's actually Together Mode. That's where Microsoft takes people out of their box, their individual video stream, and puts them into what looks like a common setting. In a work situation, you could take a meeting of 16 people and put them into what looks like an auditorium or a conference room or a coffee shop. This is not just, clever visuals. This is actually easier on the brain. Scientific studies have shown us that when people look at an image like this, it's a lot easier and less taxing mentally to look at 16 people in one set in what appears to be one setting than to watch 16 different TV shows on your screen and try and keep track of all of them. So the point is, there may be some technologies, whether it's Together Mode or others, that all of a sudden make one platform better by far for you. So we recommend Zoom, but we also say, check out all the options out there. There may be something that works better for your organization. Takeaway number 7 is about personal video feeds, your cameras. When you have the option to turn them on or off, take a moment to read this. This may seem like a small thing, but it's one of those small things that actually has a big impact, because if we're talking about an ongoing battle for participation, engagement, how comfortable people feel plays a big role in that battle. If they're comfortable, they can hang in there with you longer. They may participate more. They may absorb it more, enjoy more. And if they're uncomfortable, then the opposite every step down the line. And the video feed can have an effect on that. We asked this question in our survey. Do you prefer to have your camera on or off? Well, it may depend on the setting. We asked people this question. How often do you prefer having it on or off? Now look, for today, in this setup here, you don't even have the option. But most cases, web meetings, people tell us, yeah, I like to have it on. If it's just a small group of people, I want to see them, I want them to see me. But in larger gatherings, webinars, webcasts, most people say, no, you can leave mine off. So here's what we recommend. We think, it doesn't have to be completely, black or white. What we like to do in Goodman Center webinars is, at the beginning when people are joining, they have the option to turn it on, and we tell them, turn on your camera. We'd like to say hello, we'll welcome you. Let's chat before we get going. Once we get into the presentation, however, and we want them to focus on the slides or whatever's being discussed, we'll urge them to turn them off, because we find that all those video feeds can be distracting. When we stop down for questions or comments, we'll say, turn them back on, because we want to see you while we have a discussion. But the overarching principle from start to finish is that it's your choice. If you are more comfortable having it on, leave it on. If you're more comfortable turning it off, turn it off. Some people have told us, having my video on makes me focus more, makes me feel more connected in this very disconnected world. And other people have said, having mine on is distracting. I feel like, this unblinking eye is on me and I'm on the spot. I'm physically uncomfortable. So we always leave it up to the individual. The quote that constantly rings in my head was this verbatim quote from our survey. Takeaway number 8 is about the slides. If you use PowerPoint and slides, take a moment to read this. A lot of these techniques we're about to give you are relevant for in-person presentations as well, but we feel they're even more relevant for online presenting because the temptation to be distracted, to multitask, to look away is so much greater. So everything you can do to keep people focused on the screen is valuable. In general, there's a high level of contentment. What we found is we asked people, how often are slides well designed and an enhancement to the experience in these online gatherings? And look, almost half the time people said, yeah, frequently to always, slides are good. But a couple of things to keep in mind. If your slides look like this, let's not pretend that this is interesting to look at. That might be valuable information, might be very useful, but not interesting to look at, not making the best use of this real estate. So one thing we recommend is having 2 sets of slides, one for you as the presenter and one for up on the screen for the audience. CES is the Center for Effective Services. They're based in Belfast and Dublin, Ireland. They're top-notch practitioners of this idea of 2 sets of slides. For this presentation called Reaching Out, Supporting Families, let me take you inside the presentation to one of the slides, creating a safe environment for sharing. Now, this is the presenter's slide, and you see on the right, you see those 6 bullets on the right? This is the real part she wants to cover with the audience. But this is an awful lot of text. You don't want to put this all up on the screen. Then everyone's reading or squinting at the screen. So instead, she took those 6 bullet points on the right and had them turned into colorful, eye-catching icons with very little text. And then when the presentation was running on the left, that's what she was reading from. That's what served as a handout for afterwards that had all the information that people needed. But up on the screen on the right, that's what people were looking at. Generally, you want to have as little text on the screen as possible because when you put text up there, people are going to read it. So things like citations, footnotes, and stuff like that, take them off the screen, put them in the chat box. If you do want people to read the text, then we recommend you do something like this. This is one of the immutable laws of presenting. When you put text up on a screen, in a room in person or online, people will want to read it. So if you're talking while they're reading, you're annoying them. If you're reading it to them, you're insulting their intelligence. So if you want them to read it, take a breath, let them read, and then you add something to it. You're there to amplify, to explain, not to read verbatim what they can read for themselves. Also keep in mind that how things look conveys a message as well. Style equals substance. If you're talking about your vision, the slide itself should be as inspiring in design as your vision should be, in essence. This is not an inspiring design. This is just words on a white background. But this organization, Educators for Fair Consideration, they had some wonderful images in their slide deck, including this one. So when we suggested they redesign, we said, fill the screen with these faces, these young kids you work with, and let that be the background as you talk about something as important as your vision. And lastly, 2 words, always build. If you have a slide with multiple bullet points or multiple elements, build it gradually in front of the audience so that they stay focused where you want them focused. And the action on the screen, the animation, the movement from slide to slide will re-cue interest and pull their attention back to the slide. For example, this slide, we redesigned the slide, first of all, to be more visually interesting. and to bring up each element as we talked about it. So as we talked about the role of the protagonist and story structure, that's all you see on the screen until we bring in the next element and define that, and the next after that, and we gradually build the slide in front of you, keeping you focused where we want you focused. You can do the same thing with something as mundane as a bar graph. This organization, one of our clients, the Natural Resource Governance Institute, had a presentation about 5 different regions, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, etc., and these manufacturing sectors within each. Well, if you present this slide all at once like you see it here, then what the audience is going to do is they're going to read the copy, the text, they're going to look at the images, they're going to be processing it on their own speed. Whereas if you animate the slide and build it in front of them, then you keep them focused where you want them focused, and the action on the screen pulls their eye back to the screen. Animation within slides or moving slide to slide keeps it dynamic and eye-catching, which means that it's not bad to have a lot of slides. For this presentation alone, within 1 hour, you've been looking at over 130 slides. Last takeaway, long-term trends. Please take a moment to read this. You know, what we're talking about today, this is not a pandemic survival kit, you know, to get you through the next few months until what, you know, June or July or August, when hopefully everyone's had the vaccine. This use of video conferences, this type of meeting like we're doing now, there's going to be a lot more of this, and the numbers prove it. We asked people this question. We said, before the pandemic, how often were you working from home? And we had 19% of our respondents were working from home, frequently or always, 19%. When the pandemic hit, well, we're a fortunate bunch. A lot of us were able to continue to work, but work from home. 90% of the respondents said, yes, now I'm working from home. But here's the payoff question. We said, when you are able to go back to work, how many of you anticipate still working from home frequently or always? 48% said, I will probably still be working from home. So look at that, from 19% up to 48%. So this means that if we are employers or team leaders and we have our people working remotely, we need to make sure they have a good workspace. So we asked these questions in a survey. We said, how would you rate your home or other workspace for how conducive it is to getting work done? In other words, the physical space. Do you have enough space? Comfortable chair, noise level, distractions, rated on a 1 to 5 basis. Well, we're a pretty fortunate group. 70% of us said, yeah, we're in the 4 to 5 range. We're good. How about the resources at home? Printer, computer, paper, you know, pens, whatever you need to have basically like a home office. 77%, yeah, still in the 4 to 5 range. But where we saw occasional sort of signs of trouble or warning was around this question. How often does the speed of your internet connection negatively affect your experience during web-based convenings? And look what we found here. 46%, almost half, said that it was problematic at least sometimes. And you know, a bad internet connection can kill the whole experience. So one more thing you can do is make sure that your team members have sufficient internet speeds at home, and they can measure that with programs like speedtest.net. You know, generally, you want to be as close as you can to 100 megabytes per second download and 20 megabytes per second upload. If you want a rough estimates, 100 down, 20 up is where you want to be if you want to have a good connection and a good experience. We only have a few minutes left, so let's do this. Let me share some more resources for you besides our report, and then Celia and I will stick around after the top of the hour for any questions that we didn't get to. Because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 508, all government communications, PowerPoint slides, Word documents, etc., have to meet certain accessibility standards. And you can find those at section508.gov on the web. Now, whether you're a government agency or not, this is really useful information to make sure that your PowerPoints, particularly slides for meetings like this, have fonts that are the right size, the right style, color, contrast, etc. You can also check out this site webaim.org. They're all about accessibility, training people, even certification to make sure that your materials are accessible. Excuse me. The presentation podcast, if you do a lot of presenting online, great stuff here. And look, they're now doing a lot of thinking about presenting in remote settings like today. So please check that out. And don't forget our website, thegoodmancenter.com, for our previous reports on bad ads and bad presentations, and our newest report, Unmuted. And with that, since we're at the top of the hour, one last thought before we go. It's this. Does anybody remember this guy? If his face looks familiar, 3 years ago, back in 2017, he became an internet meme. He became famous, known as BBC Dad. His real name is Robert Kelly. He's professor at Pusan University in South Korea. And in 2017, he was being interviewed by the BBC because there was an impeachment scandal in Korea and they wanted to talk to a local expert. So they connected with him via Skype. And during the interview, it started to go horribly wrong, such that over, I think, 40 million people end up seeing the video on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else on YouTube. And we all had a good laugh at the time. What we didn't realize was that we were seeing a sneak preview of where we would all be 3 years later. And if you don't remember it, here's the clip. Take a look.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me.
That's right, carry on.
My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year. Because
3 years later, the BBC had Robert Kelly and his family back for an interview. And someone who watched this on the BBC afterwards tweeted, "We are all Robert Kelly now." And I think that's worth remembering. So our last piece of advice to you today is this. We are all professionals. We are doing our best, but if we're working from home, as many of us are, we need to give each of us the space and grace to do our jobs as best we can. So thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you, Judy and Ann and Rachel and everyone in NAAEE. Good luck with your web conferences, meetings, and videos and webinars going forward, and have a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season. Thank you, everybody.
Andy, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who is still on. And Celia, thank you. And Ann and Rachel. And for those of you who want to stick around, we'll spend a few more minutes answering so many great questions in the chat and so many wonderful resources. But Andy, you are such a pro. Thank you. And Celia, thank you for answering so many of the questions as they were coming along. And Ann, thanks again so much. So Celia, I don't know if you have a list of questions to ask Andy, because there were quite a few in the chat.
Yeah, well, actually, Judy, maybe we can start with the question that you raised. Did you want to share that question?
Oh, sure. A number of people have asked us, either if it's for a staff meeting when you're talking about issues, or it's a training on equity and inclusion, that you need to have your video on because you need to be vulnerable, and people have pushed back. And so would your advice be the same? Let people do what they feel like they need to do? It's especially with equity and inclusion training.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, I know, but I still go with the overarching principle that if you want to have a discussion where people are comfortable and feel they're being respected, one of the things you have to respect is their desire not to be on camera.
Yeah.
And to say to everyone that you have to be on camera is really to start in a way that would tell people we're not respecting your personal preferences from the start. So as much as I personally would agree that I'd like to see everyone. I'd like to see everyone see me.
Yeah.
Not everyone feels that way. So
Yeah.
I would always defer to the person's preference.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, next question. What do you do when a participant hijacks the Q&A and won't stop talking?
You know, actually, I think I have, do I still have some? I think I have some slides for that. Yeah, I do. Hold on one second. Oops, where am I here? Yeah, we have what we call pocket slides. So yeah, this happens from time to time where you'll get somebody and you know they're not stopping. You know, they just keep talking. And so what I like to do is I want them to know that I'm listening and that I think that they have something of value to offer. So if they haven't said it yet, if I think I know where they're going, I'll try and jump in and say, I think I can see where you're heading with this. Are you saying, and get to the nugget, and hopefully that will end the conversation because I know that there's something they want to say. Or if they've already said it, then I'll try and say, if they're sort of talking in circles, then I'll try and jump in and do that. If I can't get a word in edgewise, we do have a slide in the back of the deck. This is one I recommend having on hand, and I will just put this up on the screen. And usually when most people see this, they go, oh, I'm sorry, Andy, did you want to speak? And I would say, yeah, it is my webinar. So that's generally what I'll try.
And Laura asked, not the mute button. And Andy, typically that is our kind of last resort response, is to actually mute them. But usually we try to go a more diplomatic route before.
Exactly.
Okay, next question. Well, Cindy says, I appreciate it if the presenters expect cameras to be on, that they tell people in advance when they register for an event that we know what to expect. Andy, do you want to talk a little bit about how we set expectations around our webinars for what kind of participation and engagement we're looking for?
Actually, I'm going to push that right back at you because when we do our webinars, Celia really focuses, sort of serves the role of the registrar, and she brings people in, and there's a week usually prior to the webinar where we send out emails and gradually ramp them up for it. Celia, why don't you talk about what we send them in the emails?
Sure. So in our emails, we send them everything they need, obviously the connection information and how they'll join, but then we also, and also information about the recording, but then we also have a little note about participation in which we tell people that we typically have webinars where people are not muted and where their videos can be on or off. And so we actually let them know that we like to have people participate in our webinars, that engagement is a big part of our classroom environment. But if for any reason they do not want to be called on throughout class, to just send us a note and we will honor that. And we also, Andy actually says that at the beginning of class as well, to privately chat us if they don't want to participate. So though we strongly encourage it, we also really leave the door open for whatever learning style someone needs and try to accommodate that. And we also send a note around participation asking if they have any special needs in terms of being able to see or hear our webinars, that we then try to accommodate in sometimes very low tech ways by simply even just sending them the slides in advance and stuff like that.
Very good.
Okay, let's see. Next question. What are the best practices around recording webinars? Do you have any advice around that? Do you always record? Do you like to tell people in advance about that? What's your stance around that?
I can't say we've given this a great deal of thought. We automatically record all our webinars. We provide recordings to attendees. So what we say to them is, if you have arrived late, leave early, or miss any part, you have the recording to fall back on. We save them for a period of time. And that's it. I haven't given it much more thought than that. Celia, would you want to add anything to that?
No, we we only make them available for a period of time simply because of storage on Zoom's
Yeah.
website, and for no other reason than that. And yeah, we actually haven't given that a ton of thought. Carissa asks, does Zoom still only offer live captioning if you either have a speedy typist on staff or pay a captioning company? Is that everyone's, Judy and Andy, is that still your understanding of?
To my knowledge, yes. If you click the closed captioning option on Zoom, you have to have someone there that you provide on staff to provide the captioning. There are captioning services you can hire, but that's outside of Zoom, and would be a separate cost.
And there are some live captioning is more expensive than the IA captioning, where it's not as accurate, but it's cheaper.
Yeah. Other questions?
I think we got to them all. I hope I didn't miss anyone. I was really trying to keep up. So,
Well, if anyone's still listening and says, "Wait, you didn't get to my question," you can email me directly, andy@thegoodmancenter.com. Just send me an email, andy@thegoodmancenter.com, and we'll answer any questions we didn't get to. Again, we'll be providing you with the slides and the recording. And Judy, do you have a copy of the unmuted report if they contact you?
Yes, and we'll
Great.
send that out again, the link to that. And just want to thank you so much for this information, the great presentation. I learned something every minute. So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who's still on, and we will be sending all of this. And Anne, thank you so much for all the work it takes to pull all this together. Fantastic. And Rachel and Raven, thank you so much as well. Rachel, thanks for being our partner in this. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful holiday. Thank you, Andy. Thanks, Celia.
Everybody.
hi,
Bye-bye.
Take care.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.